Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
Lara Voss was writing a math problem on the board when the sky above Kratos 7 changed color. The classroom windows faced east toward the atmospheric processors on the ridge, and the children in room 11 turned toward them at the same moment as the white vapor plumes darkened to amber. The color spread slowly across the horizon, thickening through the morning light in a shade that did not look like smoke or fire or anything the colony's systems should have been capable of producing. Lara stopped writing without realizing she had done it. Her coffee mug sat on the corner of the desk beside the attendance slate, chipped along the rim, the faded lettering still readable. World's okayest teacher. One of her students had given it to her 2 years earlier because, according to him, the title was statistically more honest than world's best. She had kept it because it still made her laugh every morning. Nobody in the classroom was laughing now. Then the first sirens began sounding across the colony. One of the children near the windows spoke quietly. "Miss Voss, what is that?" 22 children between 8 and 9 years old sat in 4 neat rows, watching her with the tense, uncertain expressions children wear when they know something is wrong, but still expect an adult to make it safe again. She told them to get under their desks. She used the voice she had practiced exactly once during a mandatory emergency drill 6 months ago that everyone had treated as an inconvenience. They listened. They were good kids. They always listened. The sound came next. Not an explosion. The Vorkai did not announce themselves with explosions. What arrived first was a pressure change, the kind that pops ears and silences birds, and then a low harmonic resonance that Lara felt in her back teeth before she heard it with her ears. The walls of Building C began to vibrate. The coffee mug walked itself to the edge of the desk and fell. Lara moved to the door. Outside, the sky over Kratos 7 was full of ships. The Vorkai fleet hung in the upper atmosphere like a ceiling, dark, organic in shape, the hulls grown rather than built, curved and asymmetrical in ways that made them hard to count or measure. They were not moving fast. There was no colonial defense fleet to engage. Kratos 7 had a garrison of 40 soldiers equipped for riot suppression and wildlife control. It had no gun emplacements, no orbital platforms. The colony had been classified as low risk, low priority. 1,700 civilians, farmers, teachers, engineers, medics, children. The Vorkai had chosen it precisely for that reason. Across the colony, the other school buildings were already burning. The Vorkai had taken control of the colony's own infrastructure before the first ship crossed the upper atmosphere. Building A. Building. B. The administrative annex. The medical center. All of it igniting from the inside, the processors flooding enclosed spaces with superheated gas at pressures the structures were never designed to contain. She went back inside. She got the children out from under their desks. She moved them to the interior hallway, away from the windows, the way the drill said to do it, even though some part of her already understood that the drill had not been designed for this. She counted them as they moved. She got to 22. Everyone present. The harmonic resonance was getting louder. A Vorkai ground unit came through the eastern perimeter 7 minutes after the fleet appeared in the sky. They moved in coordinated columns, 6 limbs working in perfect alternating rhythm. The sound of their movement a rapid chittering of chitin on gravel. They did not rush. There was no tactical reason to rush. The colony had no meaningful resistance. The garrison soldiers died at the perimeter, not in a battle, in a brief, one-sided engagement that was over before the sound of it reached the school. Lara heard the garrison die, She positioned herself at the end of the hallway, between her students and the exterior door. She had nothing in her hands. There was nothing to have. She thought about the equation still written on the board in classroom 11 and wondered briefly why that was the thing her mind went to. A girl was crying quietly, while a boy whose name Lara was still learning to pronounce sat beside his sister, holding her hand and staring at the floor. The exterior door opened. The Vorkai entered with the assault feed transmitting live. Sensors across the Vorkai assault force fed data back to the Queen in real time. Images, tactical readings, every stage of the operation on Kratos. 7 transmitted outward on frequencies any species in the sector could receive. The Vorkai wanted the destruction witnessed. That was the directive. Demonstrate. Transmit. Let the galaxy watch what compliance looked like from the other side. The transmission reached sector relay stations within minutes. Lara Voss died doing the only thing available to her, which was stand between her students and the door. It did not change the outcome. Nobody survived the attack on Kratos 7. The transmission played on every species' communication network simultaneously. The Thurvane received it on their trade vessels and merchant stations. Reptilian faces watched without expression, the vertical pupils of their eyes contracting slightly as the footage ran. They said nothing publicly. Privately, in encrypted channels between their senior trade councils, a single question circulated. How long before the Vorkai decide a Thurvane colony makes an equally efficient demonstration? No answer was recorded. None was needed. The Ethon Compact received it in their assembly chambers. 17 species represented. They watched together in silence. The eldest delegate, a being who had lived through 4 previous Vorkai expansion cycles, closed all 4 of its eyes when the school appeared on the transmission. It did not speak during the session. When the assembly voted on whether to issue a formal condemnation, the vote passed. The condemnation was transmitted. The Vorkai did not acknowledge receiving it. Across the sector, the pattern was the same. Watch. Calculate the cost of intervention. Decide the cost was too high. Look away. The Vorkai had been doing this for a long time. Long before humanity reached the stars, they had been moving through this sector like a tide. Slow, inevitable, indifferent. Species that resisted disappeared. Species that negotiated lost territory, paid levies in resources and labor, bent their cultures around Vorkai expansion, and called it survival. The math was always the same. The hive could absorb losses that would destroy any individual species. Fighting them was not a military problem. It was an arithmetic problem, and the arithmetic always favored the hive. Humanity had tried a different approach. 3 diplomatic delegations in 4 years. The first was ignored entirely. The Vorkai simply did not respond to the transmission. The second made contact with a Vorkai peripheral unit that relayed the message upward through the hive. The response, when it came back down, was a territorial boundary notification. Humanity's existing colonies were within acceptable parameters. For now. The third delegation attempted to negotiate a formal non-aggression framework. The Vorkai responded by expanding their patrol routes to within 2 light-years of the nearest human colony. Diplomacy for the Vorkai was not a dialogue, it was a measurement. They were measuring how much pressure a species could absorb before it stopped pushing back. Humanity kept pushing back gently, diplomatically, with carefully worded proposals and good-faith gestures. The Vorkai measured that behavior and filed their conclusion. Low-pressure species. Compliant disposition. No meaningful threat index. Then they chose Kratos 7 to confirm it. The logic was clean. Humanity was the youngest spacefaring species in the sector. Smallest territorial footprint. No interstellar military history. No alliances. no sector reputation. A species that had tried 3 times to talk its way out of a hierarchy it barely understood. The Vorkai selected Kratos 7 the way a mathematician selects an example problem. Something simple, something obvious, something that would illustrate the principle clearly for everyone watching. 250 children, the entire colony school, the future of Kratos 7 and everyone in it. The galaxy watched it happen and waited for humanity to respond. The response that came was not what anyone expected. Human space went quiet. Within days of the Kratos 7 transmission, colonial communication traffic dropped. Within 2 weeks, it had nearly stopped. Human trade vessels disappeared from their regular routes. Here, one cycle, gone the next. No explanation filed with port authorities. No rerouting notices. Nothing. The embassies and neutral stations stopped responding to hails. The human diplomatic channels, already sparse, went silent. From the outside, it looked like a species folding inward, retreating, pulling whatever it had left behind walls and waiting for the end to find it. The Thurvane trade councils updated their projections. Humanity had accounted for a small but consistent portion of sector commerce. Raw materials, agricultural exports, some minor manufactured goods. That volume began redistributing to other suppliers within weeks. The Thurvane noted the shift, adjusted their routes, and said nothing. The Ethon Compact sent a single diplomatic inquiry to the last known active human embassy, an offer to facilitate talks with the Vorkai, a negotiated settlement, territorial concessions in exchange for security guarantees. The message was received. A human communications officer responded with 3 words: message received, acknowledged. The Ethon Compact waited for a follow-up. It did not come. Weeks passed, then more weeks. Human space stayed dark. The colony worlds that could be observed from neutral sensor platforms showed minimal activity. Low power signatures, reduced atmospheric output, the thermal readings of settlements running on skeleton crews or nothing at all. Some colonies appeared fully evacuated. Others simply stopped transmitting. Where the people went, nobody knew. And what nobody outside human space could see was that the shipyards had never stopped running. Across every major system, construction crews worked rotations that pushed the limits of what human bodies could sustain without collapse. The yards at Meridian were producing hulls at 3 times their rated capacity, while retrofitting stations stripped down civilian vessels, cargo haulers, survey craft, anything with a functioning drive and enough structural integrity to survive reinforcement, and rebuilt them into something harder and more dangerous. Armor plating from mining operations went straight from extraction to fabrication lines, welded onto civilian hulls by engineers who had not slept properly in weeks and no longer considered that unusual. In a test facility on a moon with no registered name, a weapons engineer named Sokol ran a cutting tool along a mounted slab of Vorkai chitin recovered from a border skirmish 2 years prior. The chitin was dense, layered, extraordinarily resistant to the energy discharge that human sidearms produced. The test scores for standard ballistic penetration were marginal. It had been a known problem with no clean solution. The cutting tool was an industrial chainsword, mining equipment, rotating micro teeth on a reinforced blade designed for asteroid rock and compressed ore deposits. It went through the chitin slab in 4 seconds. Sokol stood there for a moment, listening to the sound the blade made as it finished the cut. A grinding roar that dropped into a low mechanical snarl as it cleared the material. He looked at the clean edge of the cut. He looked at the tool in his hands. He wrote one line in his test report: effective against Vorkai biological armor at all tested thicknesses. Recommend immediate scale production. He did not write anything about the sound. There was nothing in the test parameters about the sound. He noticed it and moved on. The Vorkai Queen processed the silence and reached her conclusion. She was not a body that thought, but a thought that possessed a body. A vast, ancient consciousness distributed across billions of Vorkai organisms, each drone, soldier, and worker feeding sensory data back into the central mind. She did not experience Kratos 7 the way the units on the ground experienced it. To her, it was information. Numbers. Outcomes. The outcome had been optimal. Total neutralization of target population. Full transmission confirmed received by all sector species. Projected compliance index for humanity. High. Projected response pattern. Withdrawal. Internal consolidation. Eventual petition for negotiated terms. The silence confirmed it. Species under existential pressure retreated. They always retreated. Every species the Vorkai had pressured across centuries of expansion had followed the same pattern. A brief period of noise, then silence, then the petition for terms. The silence was the capitulation. The petition was just the paperwork. She had seen it thousands of times. The model had never failed. She began redistributing forces. Human territorial space, largely vacated, offered expansion corridors that had previously required navigating around active colonial infrastructure. With humanity in retreat, those corridors opened. Vorkai patrol routes extended. 3 colony positions that humans had abandoned were logged for potential Vorkai installation. The calculation was efficient. The expansion was logical. There was no reason to devote further processing to a species already in terminal decline. The Queen moved on to other problems. She did not know what a Chainsword sounded like. She did not know yet that the silence was not surrender. As far as anyone watching could tell, the children of Kratos 7 were gone. The galaxy had written humanity off, and the Vorkai had already won. They were wrong. Humanity was just getting started. The Ardennes dropped out of dark transit 40,000 kilometers from the Vorkai relay station and opened fire before the hive units on the station finished registering the contact. Brennan watched the tactical display from the bridge. No orders needed. The crew had run this exact sequence 11 times in the past 6 weeks. Every station knew its job. The Ardennes shuddered as the main batteries fired, the vibration moving through the deck, plating, and up through the soles of Brennan's boots. The relay station came apart in 3 salvos. "Transit calculated," the navigation officer said. "Go," Brennan said. The Ardennes vanished back into dark transit before the nearest Vorkai response fleet finished forming up. Behind them, 2 other human ships swept through the debris field, salvage drones already deploying, pulling Vorkai components and biological material into collection bays before following the Ardennes into dark space. 11 minutes from emergence to disappearance. The Vorkai response arrived at an empty coordinate and a field of cooling debris. This was how it went for weeks. Not one battle. Dozens. Hit a supply line. Hit a sensor cluster. Hit a patrol formation from an angle that the hive coordination model designated low probability and therefore left underdefended. Take damage. Salvage what the debris field offered. Disappear. The Vorkai were built for wars that made sense. Wars where fleets met fleets, where territories were contested, where the arithmetic of attrition could be calculated and optimized. The hive mind processed every engagement simultaneously, updated its response models in real time, and redistributed forces with the cold efficiency of a system that had spent centuries optimizing war. But the human strikes did not follow engagement logic. They hit things that were not high-value targets by conventional assessment. Relay nodes, resupply corridors, communication infrastructure. They did not hold anything they hit. They did not advance. They left no pattern that the hive model could lock onto because there was no pattern. Brennan's orders to his battle group were simple. Do not do the same thing twice in a row. Do not strike the same region twice in succession. Be wrong on purpose. The Vorkai response was always slightly late, slightly misaligned. Forces arrived where the humans had been, not where they were. The Queen recalculated, then recalculated again. The salvage was the part nobody talked about publicly, but everyone understood. Each Vorkai component pulled from a debris field went somewhere useful. Biological chitin samples went to weapons testing. Drive components went to engineering. Communication hardware went to Brown and his team, who were building a picture one fragment at a time. The guerrilla campaign was not just disruption, it was research. Each strike taught them something. Every piece of salvage answered a question or raised a better one. The Ardennes took hits. A Vorkai fast response squadron caught them during egress from a strike on a fuel depot 3 weeks in and put 2 energy lance strikes into the port side before the human ships could break contact. The damage was real. The repair crews worked in shifts. The Ardennes kept moving. Lieutenant Devon Sunfield sat across from O'Brien in the breach torpedo, while the rest of the 9th Boarding Division checked weapons, sealed armor plates, and waited for launch clearance. O'Brien was the oldest Marine in the compartment by nearly 15 years, and carried himself with the calm economy of someone who had spent most of his adult life preparing for violent things to happen in confined spaces. Before every deployment, he performed the same small ritual without speaking. Left hand first, then right, slow cracks of the knuckles before he picked up the Chainsword resting between his boots. Nobody in the 9th ever commented on it anymore. After enough operations, the gesture had become part of the deployment sequence itself, as familiar as the weapon checks and countdown lights. The breach on the Vorkai cruiser had been textbook until the 3rd corridor, where a defender cluster was waiting in a configuration the entry scans had not shown. 12 Vorkai. Tight space. The corridor was too narrow for the energy weapons to be used effectively. Sunfield had heard O'Brien's Chainsword come alive before he saw him move. The sound filled the corridor immediately, a grinding mechanical roar that bounced off the curved organic walls and settled deep enough into the body that it could be felt in the chest and teeth as much as heard. O'Brien hit the defender cluster without hesitation, while the rest of the 9th pushed in behind him. He killed 4 Vorkai in the corridor. The 5th killed him. The Chainsword sound did not stop when O'Brien died. 3 other Marines were running them in the same corridor. The sound kept going. The 9th held the corridor, finished the cluster, got what they came for, fought back to the torpedo bay, and extracted. The whole engagement was 21 minutes. O'Brien came back in a body bag, and Sunfield wrote his name on the list and kept moving because stopping was not something the mission permitted. Lieutenant Devon Sunfield was in the torpedo bay when Captain Holt Brennan came down from the bridge. The 9th Boarding Division had just returned from a breach operation aboard a Vorkai logistics vessel. 14 minutes in hostile corridors that smelled of chitin, blood, and the sour organic heat of the Vorkai ships themselves. They came back with what they had entered for: salvaged navigation cores, a Vorkai communication node that was still partially active, and 6 fewer Marines than they had gone in with. Brennan came through the bay hatch and stood next to Sunfield without preamble. Sunfield did not call attention. Brennan had made clear, weeks ago, he did not want that down here. "How many total?" Brennan said. 19, Sunfield said, "since we started the mission." Brennan nodded and looked across the bay at the Marines returning from the breach team, his gaze lingering just long enough to count how many were missing. Neither of them sounded happy about it. "Brown thinks he has something," Brennan said. Not ready yet. Close. Sunfield looked at him but let the silence stand. When he is ready, Brennan said, I am going to need to talk to you and your people about what comes next. We will be ready, Sunfield said. Brennan looked at the bay one more time, then he left. Sunfield turned back to checking his equipment. 19 Marines were dead, and he carried the knowledge the way he carried everything else. Silently, without complaint, and without letting it interfere with the work still left to do. What nobody on the Ardennes knew, and Brown would only piece together later from the salvaged communication note, was what that sound did on the other end. The Vorkai experienced the world through distributed neural resonance. Every sensation, perception, and piece of data from each unit fed back through the hive network to the Queen simultaneously. Sound was not sound to the Vorkai. It was signal, converted to resonance, processed as information. The Chainsword operated at a frequency that did not translate cleanly into hive signal. It did not register as a weapon. It did not register as a threat pattern. It registered as interference, a grinding disruption in the resonance channel that the Queen had no classification for. The closest thing in her entire accumulated experience was damage. Signal damage, like a nerve sending wrong data. She could not locate the source within the signal. She could not filter it out. She could process around it, but processing around it cost something. And the Vorkai did not have a concept for cost that was not calculable. The Queen flagged it, filed it, moved on. She did not understand it yet. And that was the problem with things that had never happened before. They did not look dangerous until they were. Brown found Brennan in the command room 2 days after the cruiser breach. He had a display pulled up, showing engagement data from 6 different strikes, overlaid on a Vorkai network map, built from salvaged components. He walked Brennan through it without theatrics. Here, response latency. In units operating beyond 40,000 kilometers from a relay node. Here, coordination degradation in isolated patrol units during simultaneous multi-point engagements. Here, a pattern in the salvaged communication hardware showing signal traffic that did not originate from individual units. It originated from somewhere else and flowed outward. The units do not think for themselves, Brown said. They receive. All of them. All the time. Brennan looked at the display. From where? That is what I don't know yet, Brown said. But it is one place. It has to be one place. The signal structure is too consistent for multiple sources. Brennan was quiet for a moment. If you find it. If I find it, Brown said, and if that source stops transmitting. He did not finish the sentence. Brennan looked at the map for a long time. The strike coordinates were scattered across a wide front. Weeks of operations. 19 dead. A ship that needed repairs it had not gotten. And underneath all of it, invisible, until Brown started pulling at the thread, a single source pushing signal outward through billions of bodies, like a heartbeat. Find it, Brennan said. The Queen was adapting. Brennan's crew could see it in the response times. 3 weeks ago, the Vorkai arrived at strike coordinates 11 to 14 minutes after human departure. Now they were arriving in 8. The relay network was being restructured, nodes repositioned, redundancies added, patrol patterns randomized in ways that suggested the hive model was updating. The window that the guerrilla campaign had opened was getting smaller. The Queen was learning. Slowly, because the behavior she was learning to counter had no historical precedent in her model. But she was learning. Brennan knew what that meant. Brown knew what that meant. The strikes could continue for weeks more, maybe. Then the window would close, and the campaign would shift from costly to catastrophic. Whatever they were going to do with Brown's theory, They needed to do it before the Queen finished closing the gap. The Ardennes ran dark between strikes, the crew working in the low hum of a ship conserving power, the repair team still patching the portside damage, Brown in his workspace, surrounded by salvaged Vorkai hardware and data he was pulling apart one layer at a time. And somewhere in Vorkai core territory, a signal pulsing outward through billions of bodies, keeping them all moving in perfect coordination, never stopping, never sleeping. Brown found the location 4 days later. He stood in the doorway of the command room at 0 dark with the coordinate on his display and said nothing for a moment because the coordinate was deep. Deeper than any human ship had ever gone into Vorkai space. Then he went and woke Brennan up. The diversion fleet hit the Vorkai staging area at the edge of core territory, without warning and without any expectation of coming back intact. Brennan watched the casualty feed on a secondary display as the Ardennes moved through the blind corridor at minimum power. No active sensors, no communications. The ship running as cold and dark as he could make it, navigation handled entirely from the transit data Brown had pulled from salvaged Vorkai hardware. The feed updated in fragments, ship designations going from active to damaged to offline in sequence, the gaps appearing in the formation map one by one. The TEC Gravenholm, offline. The TEC Sardis, last transmission received, no response to query. The TEC Monroe holding position under concentrated fire, buying minutes with its hull. The crews of those ships knew what they were. They had volunteered for the diversion assignment, the same way the 9th had volunteered for insertion. Brennan had not ordered it. He had explained the operation and asked. Every crew had said yes before he finished the sentence. He did not look away from the feed. He owed them that much. Commander Jordan Brown was at his station running signal checks on the dead drop communication channel, the indirect routing protocol he had established with both the Thurvane and Ethon during the 16 months humanity had supposedly disappeared. While the Vorkai watched human space go dark, Brown and his team had traded salvage data, transit intelligence, supply routes, and weapons research through a network of deniable contacts that none of the participating governments officially acknowledged existed. The query had been sent when they entered the corridor. The response would come when it came. Brown had nothing to do now but watch the channel and wait. The corridor was narrow in navigational terms, a gap in the Vorkai relay network created by 6 weeks of precise strikes on specific nodes, wide enough for the Ardennes and the 2 smaller ships running with her. The Queen's sensor sweeps were passing over it every few minutes, looking for the anomaly she knew was there, but had not located yet. Each sweep closer than the last. Brennan watched the corridor timer and the casualty feed and said nothing. The Monroe went offline 40 minutes into the approach. BEEVEE-149 appeared on the navigation display as a mass reading first, then resolved into a planet as the Ardennes closed distance. Partially organic from orbit, the Vorkai megastructures grown into the rock over centuries were visible even from space, dark latticed formations spreading across the surface like something that had been alive once and calcified. The atmosphere was thin and chemical. The cradle, where the Queen itself resided, was buried kilometers below the largest of the surface structures, in the oldest part of the growth, where the planet and the hive had become the same thing. The orbital defense fleet was waiting. 30 Vorkai warships in layered formation, the coordination between them so precise that their defensive fire overlapped without gaps, each ship's firing solution accounting for the others in real time. The Queen directing every one of them from below. This was the hive at full capacity, not the patrol units or the logistics escorts the guerrilla campaign had been hitting for weeks. This was the defense of the central mind. Brennan looked at it and gave his orders in the same tone he used for everything. Full power. All batteries. Get the 9th to their tubes. The Ardennes came out of low power running like a fist opening. The 2 escort ships came with her. 3 human vessels against 30 Vorkai warships, and the only mission was to hold a drop corridor open long enough for the torpedoes to launch. The first Vorkai salvo hit the Ardennes before her own batteries finished their first firing cycle. The port side, already damaged from the Chapter 2 engagement and only partially repaired, absorbed the worst of it. The shield grid held long enough to keep the hull intact, then collapsed under the follow-up impact. 2 decks lost pressure. The repair crews that had been living in those sections for weeks sealed what they could and kept the ship moving. Brennan did not leave the bridge. The Ardennes fired and took fire and fired again, while the drop corridor stayed open, and that was all that mattered. Sunfield felt the torpedo launch as a kick in the chest, and then 30 seconds of violent transit and then impact. The insertion pod cracked open against the megastructure surface, and the 9th came out into thin chemical air and gravity slightly heavier than standard, and a surface that felt wrong underfoot. Not rock, not quite. Something with give to it that rock did not have. The Vorkai growth integrated into the planet's own geology until the distinction had stopped mattering. 12 Marines remained in the 9th after weeks of boarding actions and losses that had reduced the unit to something leaner and harder than the battalion that had started the campaign. O'Brien's absence still lingered in the formation whenever they moved, an empty space on the left side that nobody else had permanently filled. The cradle entrance was 300 meters ahead, a tunnel mouth grown into the megastructure, wide enough for Vorkai defender columns, lined with the same organic material as the surface. Dark inside. The thermal readings showed movement and density that made the number difficult to estimate. Sunfield looked at it for exactly 1 second. "Move," he said. They moved. The first tunnel was 40 meters wide, and the Vorkai came out of it in coordinated columns, 6-limbed, chitin catching the light from the Marines' equipment, compound eyes reflecting nothing readable. They moved with the perfect synchronization of things that shared one thought. No hesitation, no spacing errors. Every unit's movement accounting for every other unit's position. The Chainswords came on. The sound hit the tunnel walls and came back, changed, amplified, layered, the grinding roar of multiple blades overlapping in the enclosed space until it stopped being a collection of individual sounds and became something else. Something that filled the tunnel completely. The Vorkai in the front column slowed, a fraction of a second's hesitation in the synchronization. Enough. The 9th went into the gap before it closed. Close combat in a Vorkai tunnel was not a battle in any formal sense. Sunfield moved through it the way he had learned to move through it over weeks of boarding actions, not fighting the whole column, fighting the unit directly in front of him, then the next one, letting the Marines on his flanks handle their own problems because they were capable of handling their own problems, and that was the point. No one waited for orders. No one needed to. The 9th lost 2 Marines in the first tunnel. Sunfield noted it and kept moving. The tunnels went deeper, and the resistance got heavier with every 100 meters, and the Chainsword interference got worse. Brown had pulled partial structural data from the salvaged communication node, enough to understand Vorkai megastructure logic. They built toward the center. They built with the most critical infrastructure deepest. Defender cluster density increased proportionally to proximity to the command node. The pattern was consistent across every Vorkai structure in the salvaged data. Go where the resistance gets heaviest. That was the direction. It was also true that the Chainsword frequency, which had registered as minor signal interference in open space engagements, was doing something different here. The Marines felt it as a vibration in their hands and forearms, a feedback from the blades that should not have been there mechanically. What it was doing to the Queen's signal apparatus in the lower tunnels was not something they could see. What they could see was that the Vorkai synchronization kept breaking in small ways near the blades, hesitations, formation gaps, individual units responding a half-second behind the others. It was not much. Against the full weight of the hive packed into a confined tunnel system was barely enough to keep the assault moving. They fought through 4 tunnel junctions over 2 hours. The 9th lost people at each one. Sunfield stopped counting names and started counting capability. How many blades were still running? How many Marines could still move at full function? How much damage they were causing to the cradle before the cradle killed them all. By the 4th junction, there were 7 of them. The tunnel ahead was narrower, and the defender density on the thermal readings was the highest they had seen. The Queen was concentrating everything she had left in this corridor on the approach to her chamber. Every unit she could route, she was routing here. The signal interference from the Chainswords had become severe enough at this depth that the Queen's coordination over the defenders was beginning to fracture. Vorkai units arrived at tunnel junctions out of formation, collided with each other in confined spaces, reacted to Marine positions seconds too late, and sometimes froze entirely, while conflicting signal corrections rippled through the network. Sunfield looked at the thermal reading for 1 second. They went in. On the Ardennes, Brown's dead drop channel opened. The data arrived in 2 fragments. The Thurvane packet came first, navigational routes, structural schematics, and portions of the cradle's lower architecture rendered in Vorkai. Notation that Brown had spent weeks learning to interpret from salvaged hardware and intercepted logistics data. The Ethon transmission arrived several minutes later. Older information, incomplete but precise enough to matter. Archival reconnaissance data recovered from a previous Vorkai expansion cycle, cross-referenced against the cradle layout, and narrowed to 1 chamber deep beneath the primary structure. Brown assembled the pieces in under 10 minutes. He overlaid the incoming data onto the signal map he had been building for weeks, from salvaged communication nodes and relay traffic patterns. The central transmission source aligned with the chamber coordinates almost perfectly. Until now, he had only known the direction the signal was coming from. Now, he had an exact location. He transmitted the coordinates to Sunfield's display through a tight encrypted beam. Sunfield received them in the middle of the 5th tunnel junction, fighting, and glanced at the coordinates for half a second. He was already going the right direction. He had been going the right direction since the 2nd tunnel with the help of his thermal reading. The coordinates confirmed it and gave him the final distance. 230 meters. 1 more junction. 1 chamber. He closed the display and kept moving. The chamber was large, not a room. A space the size of a ship's hangar, grown rather than built. The walls organic and pulsing with the same slow rhythm as the planet's megastructure above them. The bioluminescence was dim and blue-green, the light sourceless, coming from the walls themselves. The Queen was at the center, and she did not resemble anything the Marines had prepared themselves to encounter. She was large, larger than anything the 9th had encountered in boarding actions or tunnel fighting. And she was still, in the way that things are still when they have never needed to move. She had been in this chamber for longer than humanity had been in space. The chamber had grown around her. The cradle had grown around the chamber. The planet had grown around the cradle. She had defenders in the chamber, a dense ring of them between the tunnel exit and her position. More than the 9th had the numbers to fight cleanly. The Queen was processing at maximum capacity and producing no viable solutions. The inputs were wrong. The enemy units in her chamber numbered 7. 7 was not a number that should have reached this point. Her model had routed sufficient defenders to stop 7 units at the 3rd tunnel junction, then at the 4th. Then at the 5th, the model had been correct each time in terms of force deployed. The model had been wrong each time in terms of outcome. The error was consistent, and she could not identify the variable that was producing it. The Chainsword interference that had been degrading the hive signal throughout the tunnel system became dramatically worse inside the chamber. The enclosed space amplified the grinding mechanical roar into sustained disruption that the Queen's signal architecture could no longer process cleanly. Her coordination of the chamber defenders dropped further in resolution as conflicting corrections rippled through the network faster than she could stabilize them. She generated 17 solutions in the time it took the 7 humans to cross the chamber entrance. None of them resolved. The 9th boarding division went through the defender ring the way they had gone through every tunnel, not as a unit executing a plan, but as individuals solving the same problem from 7 different angles simultaneously, no 2 of them doing the same thing. The chaos of it defeating the coordination that the Queen was trying to impose on her defenders with a signal that kept degrading. The Queen had no classification for what was happening to her model. The chamber was loud with Chainswords. She had no historical data that produced a comparable scenario. Every species she had ever pressured had a breaking point, a threshold of loss beyond which continued resistance became irrational and cessation became the only logical output. She had applied that threshold model to humanity, and the model had failed. She had recalculated, and the recalculation had failed. She had concentrated maximum defensive force at every logical choke point, and the concentration had failed. 7 units were through her defender ring. She produced 1 more solution set. It did not resolve either. Sunfield reached her first. The defenders were still collapsing around the chamber when he brought the Chainsword down, finishing it the same way he did everything in a tunnel, without hesitation, without ceremony, and without looking away. The chamber went quiet. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Sunfield heard it, a deep subsonic vibration running through the walls of the chamber and the structure beneath it, the constant pulse that had been present everywhere inside the cradle since the moment they entered. Now slowing unevenly, breaking rhythm, beginning to fail. The blue-green bioluminescence dimmed across the walls in gradual waves as the sound faded deeper into the planet. The hive link was fracturing. The defenders at the edges of the chamber slowed first. Their movements lost the synchronized precision that had carried them through every previous engagement, breaking apart into uneven individual motions with no apparent coordination behind them. Some stopped entirely. Others shifted direction without purpose and froze again moments later. None of them attacked. In orbit, Brennan watched the Vorkai fleet's formation integrity degrade on the tactical display. Ships that had been firing in perfectly synchronized volleys began firing out of sequence. Formation spacing opened as position-keeping calculations stopped updating. 2 Vorkai ships collided at low relative velocity. Neither ship had maneuvered to avoid the impact, because the maneuvering instruction had not come. Brennan had 4 minutes, maybe 5. "All ahead," he said. "Get us to the corridor." The Ardennes turned on damaged drives and ran. The Vorkai ships that should have intercepted her were still executing the last formation instructions they had received, holding positions that no longer made tactical sense. She made the corridor entrance. The diversion fleet survivors were waiting at the far end. 4 ships remained from the 14 that had gone into the diversion attack, running on partial power, holding position, the crews that were left doing what crews did, keeping the ship alive, waiting for a signal that told them it was over. Brennan looked at the formation map. 4 from 14. He did not have words for that, and did not look for any. On the surface of BEEVEE-149, in a chamber that was slowly going dark as the biological systems of the cradle lost the signal that had kept them coordinated. Sunfield stood with his Marines, and the silence that comes after Chainswords, "Stop." He looked at what was left of the ninth, not unharmed, not whole, standing. He looked at the chamber walls losing their light by degrees. He opened the comm to the Ardennes, static first, then Brennan's voice, rough from hours of the bridge. "Sunfield." "Brennan." A silence between them that neither of them tried to fill with anything. Two men on opposite ends of the same thing, listening to each other breathe across the distance between orbit and the cradle floor. The kind of silence that said everything the words would have gotten wrong. Then Brennan said, "How many?" "4, Sunfield said. Another silence. "We are coming down to get you," Brennan said. Sunfield looked across the chamber at the defenders near the walls, no longer moving with the precise coordination they had carried through every previous fight. Then he looked at the 4 Marines, still standing in the dimming light, and thought about the 19 who were not. "Take your time," Sunfield said. He sat down on the chamber floor and waited while the light in the walls slowly faded. Across the sector, Vorkai fleets and ground units built around a single coordinating mind were beginning to slow, falter, and fall silent for the first time in centuries. It did not feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion and silence, and the weight of everyone who had not made it back.
Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.